She was pulled over on a quiet Georgia road, no speeding. No broken taillight. The officer didn't ask questions. He ordered her out, cuffed her, and radioed in, a suspicious individual. Others passed by without a glance. What he didn't know, she was a retired U.S. Army general, with direct access to the Pentagon. So, who really posed the threat? Before we get started, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling real, powerful stories that challenge how we see justice and respect. The early sun skimmed the tops of Georgia's pine trees as Cassandra Ellison eased her silver SUV over the quiet hill. The road was nearly empty, except for the hum of birds and the faint rustle of spring wind. She wasn't rushing. She never did anymore. Retirement had taught her that time has its own rhythm. In the passenger seat sat a small cloth bag of fresh produce from the weekend market. Her dashboard carried a single laminated tag, Retired U.S. Army. She didn't hang it for others. Just for herself. A nod to decades of command, of discipline, of service no one really asked about anymore. She adjusted her sunglasses and kept her hands at 10 and 2. Calm, steady. A sheriff's cruiser appeared in the mirror. The lights flashed. No siren. She blinked, slowed, pulled over. Just another morning. Until someone crossed the line. It was the kind of morning that passed without drawing attention, a quiet stretch of Georgia road. Sunlight barely cresting the pine trees, and the soft hum of a distant lawnmower blending with birdsong. Cassandra Ellison drove her old silver SUV with practiced calm. The dashboard rattling slightly with every bump. The car wasn't much to look at, but it moved like it belonged, slow, steady, deliberate. On the rearview mirror hung a faded tag laminated in plastic, Retired U.S. Army. Most people didn't notice it. Some glanced at it and looked away. Cassandra never minded either way. That tag wasn't for others, it was for her. A quiet reminder of the 35 years she had given her country, and the discipline it had given back to her in return. She approached the intersection near a small gas station. Where the light turned red, she stopped, letting her fingers rest gently on the wheel, her thumb tracing the worn leather. Across the street, a teenage boy waited with a backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't look at her. Most people didn't, and that, Cassandra had learned, wasn't always a bad thing. But today was different. A patrol car pulled in behind her. Slow and deliberate, red and blue lights flickered to life, coloring the rearview mirror with accusation. Cassandra blinked once. No speed, no turns, no infractions. Her tags were current. Everything was in place. Still, she pulled over, shifting the car gently into park. The officer stepped out, white, mid-30s, lean but tense in the shoulders. His walk wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. Brent Mallory. She didn't know his name yet, but she would soon. He approached her driver's side window, tapping it twice with the back of his knuckle. Cassandra lowered the glass halfway. Her voice was calm, practiced. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Brent didn't answer. His eyes did the talking, sweeping across the interior of the car, pausing briefly at her face, then drifting back out toward the quiet road. His silence carried the weight of suspicion, or perhaps habit. He didn't see Cassandra Ellison. He saw someone out of place. "License and registration," he said, not looking at her. Cassandra reached into the glove box, pulled out her documents with careful slowness, and handed them over. Her hands were steady, her face unreadable behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. Brent took the papers, glancing at the name, the address, the date of birth. He paused at the tag hanging from the mirror. "Army, huh?" he muttered, not a question, more like a flick of the wrist. A dismissal. She nodded once. Yes. No reply. He walked back to his cruiser, documents in hand. Cassandra watched him through the mirror. Her fingers rested again on the wheel. The skin on her knuckles showed her age, creased, sun-touched, strong. On her wrist, the faded fabric of an old army hair tie, frayed at the edges. Still holding. A white woman at the gas pump turned her head slightly. Their eyes met for half a second. The woman looked away, unscrewing the gas cap with sudden focus. No one else looked. No one else seemed to care. Cassandra breathed in, slowly. The air inside the SUV smelled faintly of lavender, an old sachet tucked in the console. It was one of those details no one saw. But it kept her grounded. She had learned to sit still when necessary. She had learned the value of silence. Brent returned, still frowning. He didn't offer back the documents. He didn't say why she was being stopped. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle." Her fingers tightened around the wheel. Just slightly. "Is something wrong?" she asked, keeping her tone even. "I asked you to step out of the vehicle." She looked at him now. Directly. Her sunglasses reflected his posture back at him. There was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where Brent hesitated. His jaw shifted, like a man unsure if he was escalating something or simply following protocol. But that moment passed. He reached toward his belt, adjusting the strap of his holstered sidearm. Not a threat, not yet, but a signal. "Step out of the vehicle." "Ma'am." Cassandra didn't move. She sat still, her shoulders square, her face calm. And then she spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just plainly, as if she were stating the weather. "Is this really necessary?" No answer came. Brent's hand stayed near his hip. The wind picked up slightly outside, carrying the scent of gasoline and spring dust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet again. Cassandra's fingers stayed where they were. The sunglasses stayed on. And for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The metal of the handcuffs pressed into her wrists. Not hard, but with a steady, humiliating insistence. Cassandra stood next to her SUV, the heat from the pavement rising through the soles of her shoes. The wind had died down. Everything around her was still, except for the quiet buzz of insects and the faint tap of Brent's boots as he moved around the car. He didn't speak to her. He didn't ask if she was comfortable or if she needed water. He just walked the perimeter, glancing inside the vehicle, pulling gently at the handle of the rear door, making notes into the mic clipped near his shoulder. To someone watching from a distance, it might have looked like a routine stop. Nothing dramatic, nothing out of the ordinary. But to Cassandra, it was a moment she had never expected to live again. Not after all those years of serving, of earning respect the hard way. Not after the medals, the missions, the decades of walking into danger so others didn't have to. And yet here she was, cuffed, under the Georgia sun, by a man who hadn't bothered to ask her name. She kept her back straight, not out of pride but because her body didn't know how to stand any other way. 35 years in uniform had taught her that posture mattered, especially when people assumed you were the problem. Her sunglasses shielded her eyes, but behind the dark lenses, her gaze was fixed on the pavement in front of her. Small pieces of gravel dotted the shoulder of the road, catching the light like slivers of broken glass. The silence around her was thick. Not a single person from the nearby gas station had come closer. Not one word from the woman she'd locked eyes with. Cassandra could feel their presence, though, watchful, uncertain, unwilling to intervene. Brent was talking again, into his radio, his voice casual, almost bored. "Got a middle-aged female. Name's Ellison. Something doesn't add up. I don't like the way she looked at me. Just seems off." He didn't whisper. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't even turn away. Cassandra closed her eyes for a second. Not long, just enough to swallow the rising sting in her chest. She'd been through worse. She'd stood in dirt-floored hospitals and watched her soldiers bleed out under makeshift lights. She'd had sandstorms bury her boots and enemy fire light up the sky above her. And not once, had she ever felt as invisible as she did now. Because Brent wasn't afraid of her. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance, something to be handled and moved along. She thought back to a night on base, Kandahar. Maybe, Bagram. The power had gone out during a sandstorm, and she'd sat alone in the ops tent, reading over intelligence updates by flashlight while the wind screamed outside. No one had expected her to do that. No one had thanked her for it. But that night, she'd known she was holding something together. That her presence mattered. Now, she was just another woman in cuffs. She shifted her weight slightly. The cuffs clinked behind her, the sound sharp in the still air. A motorbike hummed by. The rider glanced at her. He slowed just enough to take a longer look. She watched him reach for his pocket, then stop. His hand dropped back to the handlebars. He accelerated and disappeared around the bend. Brent returned to her side. He didn't meet her eyes. "Ma'am, I'm gonna have to keep you here while we verify a few things," he said, voice clipped, impersonal. There was no offer to sit, no hint of apology, just procedure, spoken as if it were holy scripture. Cassandra turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him. Her voice was soft, steady, almost too quiet to hear. "Can I make one phone call?" She didn't ask with desperation. She didn't plead. It was a request from someone who still believed, barely, that dignity could be preserved. Brent didn't answer right away. His jaw moved, like he was chewing on the moment, deciding, perhaps, whether to grant it. The sun glinted off the roof of her SUV. Somewhere behind the trees, a wind chime stirred faintly, the sound brittle and distant. And Cassandra waited, her hands bound, her voice hanging in the air, unanswered. Brent didn't hide his reluctance. His brows pulled together as he took a slow step back, one hand hovering near the buckle of his belt, the other still gripping the radio at his shoulder. "One call," he said curtly. "Make it quick." Cassandra nodded once, neither thankful nor angry, just precise. Her fingers moved with care, reaching into the inner lining of her jacket where a small zippered pocket held her phone, screen dim. Battery half full. She tapped the power button, unlocked the screen, and scrolled down the list of saved contacts without hesitation. She selected the number labeled simply, Rivers, Pentagon Direct. The call connected on the third ring. "Colonel Rivers," came the voice on the other end. "This is General Ellison," Cassandra said calmly, her voice low and even, like issuing a command in a storm shelter. "I need code red verification and aerial confirmation. Location: County Route 6. Mile marker 47. Civilian detainment under false premise. I repeat, false premise." The silence that followed was only a few seconds. But in that space, something shifted. A tone, a breath held. "Understood, ma'am," Colonel Rivers replied, voice steady but clipped. "You'll hear us before you see us." Cassandra ended the call without another word. She didn't look at Brent. She didn't glance around to see who had heard. She simply lowered the phone and slid it back into her coat as if nothing unusual had occurred. Brent, now watching her more closely, squinted. "What kind of call was that?" he asked, his tone losing its previous ease. Cassandra finally turned her head. She removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that didn't blink. Calm, clear, and seasoned, her gaze fixed on Brent like a needle holding cloth in place. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but measured, "I suggest you take 2 steps back. For your own safety." The words didn't rise like a threat. They floated like a warning, one spoken not out of malice, but from experience. Something about the way she said it made Brent hesitate. Just for a second. Behind them, the gas station murmured back to life. A couple in their 60s pulled into a pump, the man stepping out to fill the tank while the woman remained seated, squinting at the scene from behind the windshield. She leaned toward the dashboard, whispering something. The man nodded, watching Cassandra without moving too close. "They always say it's routine," the woman said, "but look at her hands." Brent's radio crackled faintly, static, then silence. He turned slightly, scanning the area, his hand still resting near his sidearm. But now, the confidence in his posture began to erode. Not outwardly, not enough for most to notice, but in the tightness of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the slight shift of weight between his feet. He took a step forward. "What agency are you with?" he asked. His voice had changed, no longer dismissive, but edged with something new. Concern? Suspicion? Cassandra didn't answer. She adjusted the collar of her coat, looked at the tree line in the distance. Then came the sound, low at first, like a rumble behind the clouds. Not a storm, not thunder, something mechanical, rhythmic, heavy. Brent turned toward the sound, his head snapping up. In the background, a child's voice cut through the stillness. A boy on a bicycle, pedaling fast down the opposite lane, pointed toward the sky as he passed. "Mom, there's a helicopter coming." And suddenly, Brent wasn't the only one listening. At the gas station, a woman lowered her window. A clerk stepped out from behind the counter inside. The sound grew louder, closer, like the slow beat of something inevitable. Cassandra didn't move, she didn't smile, she didn't explain. She simply waited. And Brent, for the first time that morning, felt something deeper than confusion. He felt the stirrings of doubt. The sound came first, low and steady, like a distant thunder that grew heavier with each passing second. The trees along the edge of the road began to sway, their branches trembling before the force even reached them. The couple at the gas pump looked up in unison, squinting into the sun-drenched sky. Across the lot, the clerk stepped out of the store and shielded his eyes. Squinting upward, the Black Hawk sliced across the clouds, descending not with menace, but with absolute certainty. It hovered just high enough to avoid causing panic, but low enough that the ground trembled under its presence. The rotor wash scattered dust and loose leaves across the blacktop, sending a ripple through the hanging sign above pump number 3. One of the letters on the old "We Sell Ice" banner snapped loose and flew into the air. Brent's head snapped toward the noise. He stumbled a half step back, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt, then freezing there. For the first time that morning, he looked like a man who had not only lost control of a situation but had no idea how it had slipped away. Before he could speak, a tan military SUV rolled up fast from the opposite side of the road. It braked hard, tires squealing lightly, and came to a stop at the curb. The doors opened in sequence, first 2 soldiers in full dress. Then Colonel Rivers. He didn't walk, he moved like a force. Crisp, tall, shoulders squared beneath the weight of quiet authority. His boots didn't stomp, but each step felt deliberate, chosen. He wore mirrored sunglasses that masked his eyes completely, but something about his face suggested he'd already taken stock of every person in the area. He carried a plain brown folder in his hand. Brent took another step back, his mouth parted slightly, as if to ask something, but no words came out. Colonel Rivers stopped 2 feet from him. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It didn't need to be. "You just illegally detained a United States Army general. Release her, now." The words hit Brent like cold water. He stood rigid, blinking hard, his fingers twitching near his side. There was no noise from the gas station, no chatter, no laughter, just the hum of the helicopter and the beating of Brent's own heart in his ears. Cassandra hadn't moved. She stood straight, wrists still bound, chin lifted. The cinderblock silence around her made her presence feel even larger. She did not flinch when the wind lifted the ends of her coat, or when the soldier beside her stepped forward to unfasten the cuffs. She simply watched. A teenage girl from across the road lifted her phone, pressing record as if on instinct. From behind her, a man began to livestream. The moment unfolded in real time. A white police officer, blank-faced, surrounded by soldiers, and the woman he had detained, black, calm, unshaken, stood at the center of it all, unmoved by the spectacle. Brent opened his mouth. I didn't know." Colonel Rivers cut him off, without turning his head. "That's the problem. You didn't ask." The handcuffs clicked open. Cassandra took a single step back. Her shoulders rolled slightly, the way one might shake off a long-held burden. She adjusted the collar of her coat, brushed a speck of dust from her sleeve, then turned to Colonel Rivers and offered a single, silent nod of thanks. Only then did she turn to Brent. Her gaze met his for the first time since he'd stopped her. Long enough for discomfort to settle behind his eyes. "Officer," she said, her voice level, "you may want to check your assumptions before your badge." She didn't wait for a response. Brent's lips parted, but no words came. His throat moved like he was swallowing something he couldn't quite get down. Behind him, one of the gas station cameras blinked red, still rolling. The sound of the helicopter began to fade, its mission already done, and somewhere between the silence and the dust, Cassandra stepped forward, not in anger, not in triumph, but in the kind of dignity that doesn't need permission to be seen. By sunset, the internet was flooded. #General Ellison trended within hours. Her face frozen mid-stride, her posture tall beneath the afternoon sun. But she wasn't looking at any of it. She had already turned away. The days that followed blurred at the edges, like pages left out in the sun. Cassandra tried not to turn on the television, but it found its way to her anyway, through neighbors stopping by, mail carriers with awkward glances, and even the cashier at the corner market who asked, "Was that really you?" The video had gone everywhere, first on Twitter, then picked up by the networks. It wasn't just the footage of the helicopter that drew attention, it was the image of a woman standing perfectly still. Hands cuffed, her coat catching in the wind as soldiers stepped forward. And it was the voice. Calm and unflinching, delivering a line that rang louder than sirens. You may want to check your assumptions before your badge. That one sentence had become a banner. People printed it on t-shirts. Journalists quoted it in op-eds. Talk shows debated it to exhaustion. But Cassandra didn't join the noise. She spent the next 2 days in her garden, trimming the rosemary bush, tending the tomato vines, and watering the struggling lavender near the fence. The earth grounded her. It always had. On the third afternoon, she was pruning a stubborn branch when she heard the knock. Not a forceful knock, 3 polite raps, quick and unsure. She set down her clippers and wiped her hands on her jeans as she walked toward the back door. A young woman stood on the small wooden step, holding a camera in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "Hi," the woman said, offering a nervous smile. "My name is Leah Williams. I think you might already know me." In a way. Cassandra tilted her head, not recognizing her. Leah raised the camera a little. "I was the one who filmed that video," she said. "The one that, well, went everywhere." Cassandra didn't flinch. She just looked at the young woman for a beat, then stepped aside and gestured in. "Come on in. You look like you need to sit down." Leah nodded quickly, almost embarrassed. "Thank you." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of chamomile and old wood. Leah settled onto the edge of the couch, setting the bag down gently like it carried something fragile. "I didn't come for an interview," she began. "I'm not here to film anything. I just needed to tell you something in person." Cassandra poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on the side table and handed one to her guest. Then she sat across from her, hands folded loosely in her lap. Leah took a breath. "I was there that day because I was doing a profile on small-town law enforcement. Nothing controversial, just one of those pieces people scroll past. When I saw you being stopped, I didn't think much of it at first. But then I saw his body language. I saw yours, and I knew something was wrong." She paused, then added softly, "But I didn't step in. I just kept filming." Cassandra didn't interrupt. She watched Leah, steady and unjudging. "I've been thinking about that moment nonstop. I thought maybe I'd made it worse by doing nothing. But then people started sharing it. And now," she trailed off, looking down at her hands. "You gave people something to see." Cassandra said finally. "Sometimes, silence isn't the absence of action. Sometimes it's the thing that lets truth echo." Leah looked up, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. They sat for a while, talking. Not just about the day of the stop, but about systems, and people, and the weight of doing the right thing when no one's watching. Cassandra spoke slowly, choosing her words like planting seeds. Leah listened with the earnestness of someone who had just begun to understand how heavy the world could be. Then the phone rang. It was the landline, an old rotary model on the corner table, used only by a handful of people who knew it still worked. Cassandra excused herself and answered with a quiet, "Hello." Leah watched her expression change, not with surprise, but with something more complex. A kind of recognition, like a soldier who sees the next assignment before the order is even given. When Cassandra hung up, she turned back toward Leah. "That was from the Department of Defense," she said simply. "They want me to come to DC next week. Not for an award. They want to talk about a new training initiative for local law enforcement." Leah's eyes widened. "Are you going?" Cassandra took a sip of her water. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said. "I want to be useful." They sat in silence a while longer. Before leaving, Leah reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not a script. Not a questionnaire. A letter, handwritten. "I wrote this after I posted the video," she said. "Not for publication, just for myself. But I think you should have it." Cassandra didn't unfold it. She held it carefully, like something living. "My mom," Leah added quietly, "was stopped like that once. She never told anyone but me. I guess I needed to believe it could mean something now." Cassandra looked at her, not just with kindness, but with understanding. "Then maybe," she said softly, "it already has." The room smelled of polished oak and new carpet, a scent that didn't belong to the kind of conversations about to unfold. At the Pentagon's conference wing, behind a pair of frosted glass doors etched with the seal of the Department of Defense. Cassandra was led into a space that was more stage than meeting room. The long mahogany table stretched from one end to the other, its surface gleaming beneath soft overhead lighting. A pot of coffee sat untouched near the wall, and a monitor on the far side displayed nothing but the department's emblem. She had been welcomed cordially, even warmly. The assistant who escorted her in offered a practiced smile and complimented her on the dignity she had shown during the Georgia incident. But Cassandra knew that tone, the one that praised you just enough to keep you quiet. As the meeting began, the tone shifted quickly. There were 8 men and 3 women at the table. Most wore suits with lapel pins. A few had folders opened in front of them, but the expressions on their faces suggested they had already made up their minds. "We understand the public's response," one man in his 60s began, his voice smooth like radio static. "But we're here to discuss policy, not to react to viral moments." Cassandra sat still, shoulders relaxed but upright, her fingers folded neatly in her lap. She listened, not interrupting, as another member leaned forward. "We're not saying what happened to you wasn't unfortunate, General Ellison, but the system, as it stands, works in the vast majority of cases. This was an anomaly." Another voice joined in, this one younger, sharper. "If there's truly a systemic issue, why hasn't it surfaced before now? Surely we would have seen more examples. If this were widespread." Cassandra blinked once, then reached into her leather portfolio and placed a thin folder on the table. The room quieted as she opened it, revealing a spreadsheet, rows upon rows of dates, locations, departments, and footnotes. "This," she said calmly, "is a sample of 312 reported incidents of wrongful detainment or excessive stop and search practices. All from the last 10 years. All involving officers who claimed reasonable suspicion. Nearly all resolved internally. No media, no public review. No one reached for the folder." The air in the room thickened. One of the officials shifted in his seat. Another reached for the coffee pot but decided against it. "They were never surfaced," Cassandra added, "because the people it happened to didn't have helicopters coming for them. They didn't wear rank on their ID cards. They just went home, if they were lucky, and tried to forget." Silence followed, a long one. The chairwoman, a woman with gray streaks in her bun and glasses she kept adjusting, cleared her throat. "We appreciate your perspective, General, but policy change requires careful balance. We're not just shaping rules. We're shaping precedent." Cassandra looked at her evenly. "And precedent," she replied, "is built every time someone chooses silence over honesty." A break was called. The group filed out slowly, avoiding her eyes. In the hallway, the overhead lights buzzed faintly. Cassandra stood near the coffee station, alone, holding a paper cup of lukewarm tea. She didn't drink it, she stared into it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. A man in a dark suit stepped closer. He wasn't part of the main group. An advisor, maybe. He looked around before speaking. "You've said enough to be heard," he said quietly. "You don't need to push further." She looked at him, her face unreadable. "If you keep going," he continued, "things will come out, names, incidents, and you may be the one holding the match. I'm offering you a way to protect your reputation, your safety. No one wants this to get messy." Cassandra nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition. She set the teacup down gently on the edge of the counter. "Safety bought with silence," she said softly, "was never safety, and dignity without truth is just decoration." She turned without another word, re-entered the meeting room, and walked directly to the seat at the center of the table. A technician was adjusting a camera on the far end, routine recording. "Internal archive." Cassandra faced it directly. "My name is General Cassandra Ellison. I am not here to be a symbol. I am here because when authority becomes habit and not principle, we stop being a republic. I'm here because I believe in correction, not comfort." She paused, letting the words hang. "And I choose transparency. If not me, then who?" That evening, after the meeting had ended and the suits had vanished into their black sedans, Cassandra returned to her townhouse just outside Alexandria. The street was quiet. The wind had picked up again. Her phone buzzed. One new message. No name. Just a number. Brent Mallory, just resigned from the force. But it's not over. He's hiding something. She stared at the screen for a long moment, the glow lighting her face in the dim hallway. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a stillness, and something tightening deep inside her chest. The room was colder than it looked. The ceiling lights inside the Capitol hearing chamber hummed with the same low tension that sat beneath every breath in the room. Rows of chairs were filled with aides, journalists, and those who had come not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Cassandra Ellison entered quietly, flanked by no one, accompanied only by the sound of her own shoes against the marble floor. She wore no medals, no uniform, just a crisp white blouse under a navy blue blazer. The kind of attire that didn't ask for attention but couldn't be ignored. She carried a thin leather folder and nothing more. When she sat down at the witness table, she didn't fidget or look around. She folded her hands and waited. The chairman introduced the hearing. It had been called, he said, to address growing national concern over civil detainment procedures and racial profiling by law enforcement. Brent Mallory's name was not spoken aloud, but it hung in the air like the dust on the long table, settled but not forgotten. Brent entered from the side door 10 minutes later, summoned to appear after Cassandra. He wore a suit too new for him, shoulders stiff, eyes restless. When he caught sight of her sitting in the front row, his expression faltered. He quickly looked away and adjusted his tie with a hand that trembled slightly. Cassandra did not turn to acknowledge him. She remained still, listening as a junior clerk read aloud the summary of events. Then came Brent's turn to speak. He stood behind the podium, cleared his throat, and began with the familiar script of a man trying to balance explanation with self-protection. I followed protocol, he said. I was acting under suspicion. I had no way of knowing who she was. There was no intent to harm, no bias. It was about safety. That's all. His voice carried a note of defensiveness. But it wasn't strong. It wavered. His eyes flickered across the room, landing briefly on one of the senators who had grilled him in a prior closed session. A senator tapped his pen lightly against the table. Officer, he said, the problem isn't whether you knew who she was. The problem is that you assumed she wasn't worth asking. Brent said nothing. He looked down at his hands. Cassandra rose quietly from her seat. Her voice, when she spoke, was not written in her notes. She didn't glance at the paper before her. She looked directly at the panel. Everyone here wants to talk about protocol, she began, but we're ignoring something more basic. The way we train authority to respond to difference, whether it's skin color, age, or silence, is not about safety. It's about habit, and habit is what makes people dangerous. The room stilled. Even the aides paused their typing. I'm not here to put Officer Mallory on trial, she continued. I'm here to say this wasn't about one man. It was about the way we all get used to seeing some people as suspicious before they've spoken a word. That doesn't start with violence. It starts with assumption. One senator leaned back slowly, crossing his arms. Another, who had earlier dismissed her comments in private, nodded faintly. From the back of the room, a woman rose, young, modestly dressed, holding nothing but a notepad. It was Leah Williams. She cleared her throat, voice carrying more power than her frame suggested. General Ellison, she said, if your detainment hadn't been recorded, if there hadn't been a video, do you think anyone would have believed your account? Cassandra paused. It was the only time she hesitated all morning. I don't know, she said, carefully, but I do know this. Our collective silence is what lets injustice settle in like dust. We walk past it every day, thinking it's someone else's fight, until it lands at our own doorstep. No one clapped. No one needed to. The hearing concluded 30 minutes later. People filed out in small clusters, murmuring about tone and reform, about funding and next steps. As Cassandra gathered her papers, a congressional aide in a dark gray suit approached her. There's something you should see, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. He handed her a file envelope, the edges worn as if passed through too many hands. She opened it. Inside was a report stamped, confidential, dated 6 months prior. The top sheet read, Use of Force, Officer BM. Beneath it, photos, statements, a complaint dismissed without external review. She didn't say anything, just slid the file back into its envelope, and nodded once. The hallway outside was bathed in morning light, but Cassandra's shadow stretched long behind her. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the old stone lecture hall at Fort Moore. Dust hung in the air like a memory, soft and patient, resting on every edge of wood and brass. Cassandra Ellison stood just inside the doorway, her hands tucked into the pockets of a navy blue coat. The room hadn't changed much since she'd last taught here. The same floorboards groaned underfoot. The same flag stood in the corner, its edges slightly frayed. Time had only made the place more honest. A circle of folding chairs was arranged in the center of the room. No podium, no microphone, no name tags, just the students, 24 of them, some in uniform, some not, but all with the same quiet alertness in their eyes. They made room as Cassandra entered, and she took the seat directly across from a single empty chair. She didn't speak right away. She looked around the circle, letting the silence stretch just enough to invite focus. "This chair," she finally said, nodding gently toward the one in the middle, "is for the person who's been overlooked, or underestimated, or silenced before they had a chance to speak. And maybe," she added, glancing toward the window, "it's for the version of ourselves we still don't know how to listen to." The room stayed silent, no chuckles, no shifting, just the subtle tension of attention. A young man raised his hand, barely. His posture was respectful, tentative. He couldn't have been more than 22. Fair-skinned, buzz-cut, eyes too earnest for cynicism. "Ma'am," he asked quietly, "what stopped you from getting angry?" Cassandra looked at him for a long moment, not to intimidate, but to decide how much truth he was ready for. "Anger's easy," she said. "It flares up, makes noise, gets headlines, but it burns out fast. And most of the time, it leaves everything just as broken as it found it. I wasn't interested in making smoke. I wanted to change what lit the match in the first place." A few students nodded. One leaned forward, elbows on knees. No one wrote anything down. Near the back of the room, Leah Williams sat in the last row. No camera, no press badge, just a small leather notebook and a fountain pen. She hadn't asked to be introduced. She wasn't there to document Cassandra. She was there to understand her. Her manuscript was almost finished. Not a scandal exposé, not a political commentary, but something quieter, an exploration of restraint and dignity, and the rare strength it takes to stand still when the world tries to push you off balance. Outside, on the drill field, another class moved in formation. Cassandra could hear the rhythm of boots in unison, the staccato shouts of command. She glanced out the window for just a second. A new cadet, tall, dark-skinned, barely out of high school, stood at the front of the squad. His voice carried through the open window, steady and sure. He had been chosen to lead the formation. First time in the academy's history someone like him had been appointed that early. Cassandra rose from her chair slowly. She adjusted the collar of her coat and walked toward the empty chair in the center. She paused, placed her hand lightly on its backrest. Her palm lingered there for a moment. Then she turned and walked away. No farewell speech, no parting wisdom, just her quiet steps echoing across the old floor, and the sense that something important had settled in her place. After the session ended, the room emptied out one by one, but no one touched the chair. On the desk near the front, where the instructor would usually leave assignments or notes, someone had left behind a small item, a faded olive green hair tie. The kind issued years ago in field kits. It was worn thin at the edges, slightly frayed. No one claimed it. No one had to. Its message was clear. "I know who you are, and I will carry it forward." She didn't raise her voice. But somehow, the room got quiet. No spotlight followed her out. No victory banner flew. Just an old cloth hair tie, left behind on a desk, by someone who understood, without needing to say a word. Not all justice is loud. Some of it just lingers. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.